Well, thank you for staying with us on the news review. Let's get into the papers now as we interact with Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa, Sulemana Brima. Mr. Brima, if you can hear me, a very good morning to you. All right, we'll connect shortly with Mr. Brima, but quite a lot to talk about. The NDC's Congress over the weekend for a youth organizer, national youth organizer, and a women's organizer. Gone well, but with lots of food for thought in terms of our politics, in terms of infighting, in terms of escalations, in terms of so many other matters that we ought to be looking at. We heard from Alex Sigbefia, who was at the helm of affairs organizing all of this, and he said that, look, to be honest, there are things that did not go right, and we can't pretend those don't exist like the MPP would, and that was what he said. But I found it a bit worrisome because if there are pockets of these in both parties, it's not about this person covering or that person not doing this or that. It's about whether, according to or across the tenor of our politics, we can work on these. It doesn't matter whether you are CPP, PNC, PPP, NDC, NPP. We don't want to see these scenes, and that's the bottom line. But let me start with some of the headlines while we await Sulemana Brima to join the discussion. The Daily Graphic this morning says Dr. Dufour proposes rescue team to resolve economic challenges. That story is on page 16. I'll bring you some details of that. There's also aged to access NHIS without hindrance. And that story there as well on page 16. Pictured there, Dr. Bernard Okuboy, Chief Executive Officer of the NHIA. Then there's discussions on economy. Patriotism must reign supreme. President urges at NAFAC at 60. Then stop denigrating leaders. Professor Mensah Bonsu cautions citizens, and rice vegetable cultivation initiative launched. So where do we start? Let's start from the very start. Discussions on the economy. Patriotism must reign supreme. And now, President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo has called for more selfless, patriotic approaches to discussions around the economy and other areas of development. He said it was time to eschew extreme political partisanship in discussions around the economy and look to attaining the collective success and well-being of ordinary Ghanaians. The president said now more than ever, the country was in need of patriotic citizens who were ready to put the well-being of the country above selfish interest. He was speaking at the opening of the 60th anniversary celebrations of the National Festival of Arts and Culture, that is NAFAC in Cape Coast in the Central Region last Saturday. Also on the patriotic bit about citizens, remember, he told us to be citizens, not spectators. He said being patriotic required making sacrifices and placing the country's interest above parochial interests, stressing that, quote, to be patriotic requires special affection for one's own country, special concern for the well-being of the country, and willingness to sacrifice oneself to promote the country's good. And we'll have to explore that in the context of what the president has brought to bear. Let me take that other story on page 16 of the paper, and I'll just fuse those two stories together. So, aged to access NHIS without hindrance. And the National Health Insurance Authority has revised its policies to enable Ghanaians 70 years and above to access health services on the National Health Insurance Scheme without hindrance. Although persons in that group are exempted, they still needed to register to sign on to the scheme, subscribe to the service, hold a valid NHIS card, and also wait for a 30-day maturity period after subscription before accessing the service. Now, the new regime has, however, waived all those hindrances, and instead, the aged only have to show the national identification card, that is the Ghana card, which has been linked to the NHIS database to access care at any covered health facility. For me, a brilliant addition. And maybe to wrap before I bring in Sulemana Brima, Dr. Dufour proposes rescue team to resolve economic challenges. And former Finance Minister Dr. Kwabena Dufour has proposed the establishment of a national economic rescue team to help find immediate and lasting solutions to the current economic challenges. He said the depth of the economic crisis and the ongoing attempt to restructure the domestic debt towards macroeconomic stability and recovery of the economy called for the establishment of an economic recovery team. Quoting him, he says, "This is so because it has been established that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created the problems. Hence, there is a need for the establishment of an economic national rescue team to resolve the present crisis." The former finance minister, who had a stint with the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., USA, as an economist in the African department, said the proposed rescue team, which should be national in character and non-political, should comprise experienced bankers, insurance executives, successful business people, university professors in the field of banking and business, and respectable statesmen with experience in governance. Suleiman Abrahima, a very good morning to you. Welcome aboard.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Great. I hope your weekend went well and you're looking forward to a wonderful week.
Well, it's a tiring period of the year, but
Right.
that's what it has to be.
Okay, so before we even get into these stories, we just put out a story about the prices of chicken and how chicken is skyrocketing in terms of, it just got me thinking because I prefer fish and fish tends to be more expensive than poultry products and meat. So if even chicken is skyrocketing, then I don't know, maybe we'll just settle for eggs at a point. I don't know what your take is. What is your preference?
Well, fish as well.
Fish, right.
Between chicken and meat, I will still go for chicken. So I cannot rule chicken out.
Okay, so 3 stories for your reflection. The president says we must be more patriotic, we must be citizens so that we can resolve the problems of the country. We must show that patriotic spirit, and that collective success will be ours as we seek the well-being of the ordinary Ghanaian. Then Dr. Dufour is proposing a rescue team to resolve economic challenges that is non-partisan, that cuts across the board to ensure that we have something sustainable. And then the aged are to access NHIS without hindrance. 70-year-olds, all you have to do and above, show your Ghana card. You don't need an NHIS card, and everything will be done for you. Quick reflections on these 3.
Well, let me start from what I think is very positive, which is the story in relation to services to the aged and the fact that you would have to show your Ghana card and access the health insurance scheme. I think that's a positive development, provided that it's not just a brilliant idea on paper, because we know that the health insurance scheme would also be going through some difficulties given the economic situation that we are in. But if measures have been put in place to ensure that the scheme still operates the way it should, and this is a new measure to support easy access for the aged, I think that's really a brilliant idea. And we need to commend it and we need to support it at all times. So that for me is very positive. Dr. Dufour's suggestion about the way to tackle the current economic crisis is not a bad idea. I think some of these things indeed require non-partisan, all-inclusive approaches towards dealing with national crisis such as the one that we are in. And so I think it's a great call. I remember during the NDC,
Well, we have a bit of an issue there. We'll try to get that connection restored to Suleimana Abrahima. Suleimana, we can see you now. Please go ahead.
yes, so I think it's been done before. There have been
Right.
occasions where national stakeholder consultation meetings are organized to brainstorm and share ideas on how we deal with national issues. So I think it's not a bad idea. The question is whether those who have to listen to and make sure that this is done would do so. Now, the third part relates to the president calling for more patriotism, which I think is a good call. It's a step in the right direction. We need at all times to be patriotic towards our country, and especially in a crisis situation like this, we certainly have to be more committed, more loyal, and more patriotic to our country. But that must certainly start with leadership. And for me, if the president is talking about patriotism, I would want to see how patriotic he himself um, has been and is going to be. Because so far, I mean, it's difficult for me to point to specific acts that demonstrate rare sense of patriotism on the part of the president. I don't think that patriotic leaders would be, spending thousands of dollars flying luxurious presidential jets around the world when they have kids who are lying on their bellies to study, kids who are sitting under trees to study, pregnant women who have difficulties accessing, maternal health. I don't think that any patriotic leader looking at the crisis that we are in would say that allocations are being made to still continue with the construction of a national cathedral when people are suffering, when people really are struggling to have their daily bread because of the economic crisis that we are in. I don't think that is a sense of patriotism on the part of the president and on the part of the government. Again, any patriotic leader at this stage would take remedial measures to ensure that at least those who have benefited in government can be made to sit aside so that we can have a reduced size of government, as it's been done elsewhere. In Cote d'Ivoire, the president decided to cut the cabinet down because of the economic crisis, and their crisis is not even up as what we have. Yet the president is adamant and keeping that huge size of government with huge burden on the country. And these are people who are endowed, who can survive even without these largesse of government. And still, what do we see? The Ghanaian people are saying, look, even if Oforiatta is the most competent, in order to build confidence in the system, please let him go. His own MPs have spoken. The Ghanaian people have spoken. Every day you see Ken must go. The president is adamant. What is the sense of patriotism in that? So we want to see that sense of patriotism being exhibited by the president himself, as we call on others to also do the same. And when the president does it, leadership by example, I'm sure that it will be easy for all of us to campaign for others to do even more than expected of them. But at this stage, I think that the president himself needs to show us his sense of patriotism, even though all others need to do the same.
Right. And so it all starts with the president, the head of our national household, if you like. Let's take a quick look at this story very quickly, and we'll move on from there. Stop denigrating leaders, Professor Menso Bunsu cautions citizens. Now, a justice of the Supreme Court, Professor Henrietta Mensah Bunsu, has urged citizens to refrain from utterances and acts that tend to denigrate leaders in the country. She said such actions had the tendency of causing disaffection among the people, which could lead to instability in the country. Quote, maintaining our peace and working through our problems within a peaceful country is what holds a good future for all of us, particularly those of us with our best years already behind us, she said. Now, she said in her experience as the UN Secretary General's Deputy Special Representative for Rule of Law in the UN mission in Liberia, she had learned that surviving a war was sometimes as difficult as surviving peace. Speaking at the launch of her book, Joy, a biography of Henrietta Mensah Bunsu in Accra, she also entreated political leaders to keep an eye on the social temperature of polity and maintain social cohesion to keep citizens at peace. It's a fantastic book. I have a copy, and I proffer it to you if you don't have a copy, and to everyone else listening to us. And Joy is indeed one of her names. But quick reflections on what she says. Stop denigrating leaders. Some would also tell you that, look, sometimes the leaders ought to be whipped in line. Where do we draw the line, Suleimana?
Well, again, I think it's a welcome call. We were all brought up to be respectful towards leaders or the elderly. And so if we are seeing that go down and down, we need to, make the call that it's important for people to refrain from acts that denigrate our leaders. But at the same time, I think it's important that we make the point that leaders must also act in ways that deserve the kind of respect that they need to be accorded. And leaders in this way, I'm talking about not only leaders, but also religious leaders, our chieftaincy or our chiefs, because increasingly some of these people are acting in ways that you really wonder what they want and what is actually influencing them to act and to speak the way they do. And without mentioning names, we've heard some big chiefs talk in ways that you are tempted to respond, even though we know that, look, when chiefs speak, you are not supposed to perhaps retort. But if chiefs now begin to speak like um, ordinary party members and party propagandists and all of that, then increasingly they are putting themselves up for actions that would eventually denigrate them. If political leaders who are supposed to be leading the people are abusing the resources of the state, are stealing from the people, and then you expect that the people should keep quiet because speaking up would mean that you denigrate them, I'm afraid that cannot happen. If the president of the republic has to act in ways that would protect the public purse, that would ensure integrity, credibility, and all that happens, and that is not being done, and you expect that the people should be quiet because speaking up would mean denigrating the president, I'm afraid that is not how to build a nation. As the president said, we need to be citizens and not spectators. And being citizens in this regard would mean that speaking up our minds and speaking truth to power. And we should never construe or misconstrue the act of speaking truth to power to be an act of denigrating authority or leadership. Nations are built when people speak up and speak truth to power. I don't think that nations are built when citizens become timid in the name of revering their leadership or not denigrating leaders. So it's a welcome call, but the leaders must also act in ways that would ensure that we give them the respect that we have to give them.
All right, let's quickly get into Republic Press. We have a stack of papers, Suleimana, so maybe we'll go straight to the point on some of the next headlines and stories we're going to look at. Failure to build National Cathedral will be a disgrace to Ghana, Akufo-Addo. That is the Ochehene saying so. I'll leave you to reflect on that. I'll not share my own thoughts. There's also Pentecost Church to regulate sexual activity of members. That story is on page 7 of the paper. Biden to host Akufo-Addo and others at US-Africa Summit. Dead goat haunts Mahama as he vents frustrations. And so many interesting stories here. You know what? So let me just take them one by one. I'll take the first 3, you react, and then I'll do another 2. Now, former President Mahama has, for the first time in many years, clarified why he stated that he developed a dead goat syndrome. According to him, he relied on the said idiomatic expression to point out the frustration associated with the deregulation of petroleum prices. This, he stated, was because he knew that if the fuel prices went up, the leadership of the Trades Union Congress and other unions would not leave him in peace. Mr. Mahama said he could not bear the mass labor unrest that was prevalent at the time. And so that's the first story. The other one I will look at, and you can react to the one about the National Cathedral. I'll not read the details of that. I'm sure we know already. But the Church of Pentecost of Ghana has taken bold steps to check the sexual life of members. A new code of conduct launched by the church explicitly states that any member of the Pentecost Church caught engaging in premarital and extramarital affairs should go on suspension or have his or her membership withdrawn. Now, the Pentecost Church's position is that the church is not a mere social institution, but a holy family of saints being trained and equipped until we all attain the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. A section of the rule of conduct explained that, quote, marital fidelity and chastity before and during marriage are the hallmarks of a true Christian. And let me just add this final bit for now. Or better still, react to the 3. Mahama on dead goat and why he said it, the Pentecost Church, and the Ochehene on the National Cathedral. Let's do those for now before I bring in the political stories.
Well, Pentecost Church, I have dozens and dozens of friends who are members of the Pentecost Church. It's great to hear this, and I wish them well. That's all that I can say. I wish them well. On President Mahama, of course, that became a very topical issue when he said he had become dead goat at that time. Well, I mean, upon reflections, if he says, "Well, I was just frustrated," what can we say? I mean, he spoke out of frustration. I don't know why he's even going back to it at this time. Now, on the Ochihine statement on the National Cathedral, I think that, well, this time around he's been mild, and we are grateful to him that this time around he didn't condemn those of us who are at least opposed to the construction in this critical time of economic crisis as being
which is
or people from the villages. I think this time around he's quite charitable, and we are grateful for his continuous words of wisdom on national affairs. We are grateful to him, and that's all that I can say. People have listened to him, and I believe he can continue. He can continue on this path. On his views
do I sense sarcasm when you say he can continue on this path? I mean, I just get a hint, a tinge of sarcasm. Is it just me, or am I being misled?
Oh, well, like I said, if the chief who referred to those who criticize the leadership style and other actions of the president as being either witches or persons from villages, and this time round, he's only talking about how embarrassing it will be to Ghana and to the president if the National Cathedral was not constructed. I don't know what to say, because I believe that he witnesses the kind of suffering that people are going through. I believe that he witnesses the fact that there are Ghanaian children who don't have the basic things, to study in schools, and his preference is how not to embarrass the president, rather than how to ensure that the lives of people, of the ordinary people, are catered for. I leave that to him. I would have wished that the Ochihine would have been talking about how President Akufo-Addo, after leaving office, would be remembered forever as a leader who came and did a lot for this country, and not a leader who came and was trying to build a national cathedral at a time when the country was struggling. Not a leader who came and was flying luxurious jets around the world when the country's economy was in crisis. Well, but if that is what the Ochihine wants us to remember President Akufo-Addo for, yeah, so be it. We would remember him when he leaves.
All right. Let's get into those two other stories. In fact, four, because I'll add two very interesting international stories very briefly. But on page 3, Kwabena Ejapong drops bombshell, and a one-time general secretary of the New Patriotic Party, Kwabena Ejapong, has asked Ghanaians to brace up for tougher times amid economic hardship. He reiterated that Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta should have resigned since Ghana opted to look for international aid at the IMF. In a discussion with my own senior man and good friend, Kweku Sentim Misa, Mr. Ejapong restated his views that Ken Ofori-Atta's dogged anti-IMF stance was the reason he needed to leave his post as finance minister after the government opted for an IMF bailout program. Now, in terms of the NDC's Congress over the weekend, amid scattered violence and allegations of vote buying, the National Democratic Congress went to the polls Saturday to elect some of its national officers at Cape Coast in the central region. The elections were to choose its national youth and women executives was nearly marred by pockets of violence, as at least 6 people were reportedly injured, thereby leading to the suspension of the electoral process for hours. In the vote to lead the youth wing of the party, both leading candidates, George Opariado and Bronya Jemfi, ran tough campaigns, yet appeared to have left many delegates uninspired and undecided, hence the need for some last-minute political intrigue to make the needed difference. You saw the scenes, I am sure. Some people purported to have been shot, and lots of people, about 16, arrested on the back of the incidents there. Now, before you get into those two, I also want you to consider, I followed this yesterday on the international news. Base editing, revolutionary therapy clears girls' incurable cancer. And apparently there is some treatment for leukemia that has been found. So blood is altered in a way, I think the DNA, so that the blood that is fed into someone who has leukemia can then eventually attack the cancerous cells. You know, leukemia is cancer of the blood. And then it has worked for this young girl who is the first person to have benefited from this experimental, this experiment, so to speak. She is called Alisa and she is 13. And finally, Nobel Peace Prize. Russian laureate told to turn down award, but they didn't listen to the Russian authorities. Quick reflections, the politics, and then these two international stories.
Well, the medical revolution is great news. It takes some time. Sometimes when you hear about this, you say, "Oh, okay, from next year." Fortunately, those who have troubles would begin to have some remedial treatment. But some of these things, sometimes it takes decades to become something that can be used, in a wider way. So it's good news, and I believe that the researchers would continue to work at it. The NDC Youth and Women's Wings Congress in Cape Coast, I think that the violence was really needless and condemnable. I don't know why an internal party affair should, have those kinds of, violent scenes. So it's really condemnable, and the leadership of the party should have to take steps to ensure that these things would not happen or repeat itself at the National Congress to elect the chairman, secretary, and the other positions. Well, the results, I have followed it. It appears that things don't look good for those who are seeking to challenge the incumbents, because even though it was very, very competitive, if you look at the National Youth Organizer race, it was very competitive, same as the women's organizer position. Very, very competitive, very tight if you look at the results, and yet the incumbents managed to win. Looking at that, if it is anything to go by, I would say, well, things may not be looking good for people like Asiedu Nketia. Of course, the general secretary position is open because you don't have an incumbent competing. So one can only wish them well. The final part is Kwabena Japan. I watched that interview with KSM, and I think that over time it's emerging that Kwabena Japan really speaks his mind. Yes, he's a member of the NPP.
Especially as someone who is trying to become the flag bearer of the party.
Yeah, exactly. I think that not just this interview. For some time now, he's really been speaking his mind, and he's establishing some mark of credibility for himself. Even though I would say that looking at the competition, he is a low-profile candidate in terms of his chances, but he doesn't have to win to establish his track record. I think sometimes it is important for you to make your principles known, so that even if you don't end up being a leader, people will know who you are, rather than trying to say things that you know very well that don't align with your internal principles. And so I really salute him for speaking up his mind. And from the way things are going within this government, I think that any credible leader of the party who would want to run a very competitive elections in the 2024 race must be someone who is prepared to distinguish himself or to really set himself apart from the mess that the Akufo-Addo regime is creating. I don't think that anyone can run on the record of the Akufo-Addo regime to successfully compete for the 2024 race. And that is why I'm quite sad for people like Dr. Bawumia, who stands tall in terms of the race.
Right.
And it's going to be a challenge what record he's going to run on. And even Alan, if he happens to win, it's going to be the same problem.
All right, let's get through these stories. Ghanaian Times, the only new one that I see there, 2023 budget, Parliament races against time to approve budget as minority threatens to reject some tax handles and allocations. Then there is the Daily Guide, which also reflects stories we've seen already, but Alan Storm's NPP headquarters promises to fund albums. So I would like you to focus on the Ghanaian Times bit about racing to approve the budget. Then there is Lands Minister declares Accra Zoo safe. That's in the Ghanaian Publisher. You recall that situation a few months ago when someone actually lost his life under bizarre circumstances. Then the Chronicle, who born dog? Accra commando slapped in traffic by 61-year-old pensioner. Has to do with a story where an Accra Circuit Court presided over by Samuel Bright Aqua has advised that the security detail of the Greater Accra Minister, Henry Quartey, should be changed following an alleged assault on him by his family head. According to him, if somebody could slap a whole regional minister, then his security detail should be changed. He made the suggestion on Thursday, November 8, 2022, when one Ni Odoi Kwao II, alias Robert Kumsin, 61, and a retired computer programmer who is said to be the head of the regional minister's family, was brought before him for allegedly slapping Mr. Henry Quartey in traffic and threatening to kill him. Quick reflections.
Well, that's a very complex story. At one point, you see family issues. At another point, it's security issues. Another point is protocol issues. But of course, ultimately, it's a question of rule of law. If the family head did the wrong thing, whether he slapped the regional minister or he slapped the cleaner on the streets, that's unlawful, and the law must deal with him. In terms of whether or not the regional minister's security should be changed, for me, it comes down to the circumstances surrounding the incident, and perhaps the minister's protocol perhaps understand the security issues better than maybe a judge would. And so, well, I can only leave that to the security, detail of the minister to determine that.
Let me just pick your thoughts on this before we go in some 30 seconds. You may have heard the American ambassador speaking about rights and all of that. So she says on the anti-gay bill, as we call it in summary, Ghanaian MPs must respect people's rights. That's according to the American ambassador. She also says, we want your gay children to be safe. That's according to the American ambassador, rebuffing claims of promoting LGBTQ in Ghana. And we know what that comes along with. But then we have Sam George, who is one of the key proponents of that bill, saying if the United States allows polygamy, then they can talk about LGBTQ plus rights in Ghana. Quick take on that.
Well, I think matters of human rights are always important matters and shouldn't be based on emotions. I think we need to look at matters of rights from whatever we have assented to or agreed to at the international platforms. We cannot accept certain principles at the international platforms or international mechanisms and say we would do something tends to the contrary back at home. Of course, there's always the contestation between the international universalism and national peculiarities when it comes to matters of human rights.
Right.
And I think it's important that as a country, we reflect quite deeply on this whole piece of legislation that we are trying to introduce, so that at the end of the day, we wouldn't have a law that is so widespread and may undermine the rights of certain individuals. But talking about that, Ben, over the weekend was the International Human Rights Day, and I believe this is emerging from that. But together with the United Nations in Ghana, the EU delegation in Ghana, and in partnership with the Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice, tomorrow we have a major forum, and I'm happy to say that the forum will be covered live on Joy FM. And this will be at the British Council Hall. So perhaps we can have an extension of this conversation at this forum.
Right.
Have the Justice Minister and Attorney General speaking, the UN Resident Coordinator speaking, the EU Ambassador speaking, and it will be chaired by the Commissioner for Strage, and then we would have the NCCE also speaking. So those who can make it are welcome, and those who can't are welcome to listen to it on Joy FM. It will be from 9 to midday.
All right. Suleimana, thanks so much for always doing us the honors. Thanks for joining us this morning, and we wish you the best with that endeavor and in the rest of the week. Suleimana Brima is the Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. He just joined us for that conversation. But I'm sure you're thinking about Qatar 2022. Mouth-watering lineups coming our way tomorrow. And you would want to know all about the excitement. Just stay with us. Sports is up next. We'll bring you all the scoop.